Welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Tien, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our third of our series of talks here during Roots Tech, our little project party during Roots Tech, welcoming Karen Ray. Karen has been a dear friend to my previous startup, Ponga, and to Project Kin from the beginning, and it comes to us with deep roots in journalism and storytelling, and over the last several years has had a coaching business working with writers and memoirists as they go through the process of storytelling. And I wanted her to join us here during this series to dive into the craft of storytelling. In our talks yesterday, and if you've not seen those are recorded and on our site at projectkin.org/forum, if you want to go straight to the page on Substack. We started really walking through the challenges of that family story, and we began with a guest who is here today as well, Karla VF Staudt, and walked through that process and how she had used tools to capture and collect her family story and how she's using it to engage with friends and family. And then we picked it up in the afternoon Pacific time with Victoria McGregor, who is again an old friend now in Australia, Canadian in Australia, who talked about the challenges as she'd driven it to engage her own family in the process of storytelling. Again, attending both of those, we have Karen Ray. And again, I'm thrilled to have Karen here talking about that process toward the end of Victoria's talk, which we allowed to run a little bit late. We started in on the topic of really how a hook, how a scratch, how something interesting you want to get your claws into picks up, and then you want to follow the trail. As genealogists, we know that process. As storytellers, there's a craft to that. Karen will talk a little bit about. And in that call yesterday, we started to really get into how you can tantalize somebody with an interesting story, such as Anna was just telling us in our pregame about how the connection between Rambo and First Blood has to do with Sweden. Right there is a blog title. So we know what a hook is and how to bring people in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Ray to kick it off. How about that?
Thanks, Barbara. It is great to be here. You all are some of my favorite people. So home for me is southern New Mexico, sunshine almost year-round. And of course, like many of you, I just do business via Zoom calls and in person when I can. So a lot of times, I am doing interviews not just with individuals who are writing a memoir or working on a family history. Some of my work has encompassed doing more journalistic type memoirs. I am not a reporter. I have stood out in farm fields with farmers trying to convince them of that fact. And so I have learned over the years many ways to help that interview process, to draw people in, to get them interested and intrigued. So I'm going to give you, I think, about 8 tips, and I want to make sure I dive into the meat of that. But let me give you just a little more background of my motivation. And if I look down, I've got a ream of papers in front of me to keep me on track so I don't miss the good stuff that I want to share with you. So just bear with me on that. But I have been fascinated with storytelling since childhood, basically lurking around at the edges of those campfire conversations where conversation among the adults and the stories swirled like the smoke, just rising up. And I would rather sit there and listen to those stories than run off and play flashlight tag or catch frogs. I did that too, but all of those fun things. And so that drive to hear stories and listen well started very young for me. And as the decades went by, I looked for opportunities to hone those skills to become a better listener, a better storyteller. and about 12 years ago started remembering the time, which really came out of that phrase that we so often say in our family gatherings and with friends, remember the time? And so remembering the time would just seem like, well, I have to do that. That's what we're doing now. So as I jump in here to the things that I want to share with you, let's see where I want to begin here. You're probably going to be interviewing a family member or a friend, and this it might be a short storytelling session. It might be a longer oral history that you're going to gather. I think, Karla, you probably mentioned in your session that things can be quite short too. And so while I often work with longer book type projects or long oral history recordings, I want to emphasize what Karla mentioned, that don't underestimate the power of a snippet, of a short story, a short recording. I guess the best place to jump in on some of the things that I've learned through those years of interviewing people in a wide variety of situations, from the individuals to farmers and ranchers while I'm standing out in their field watching an irrigation, veterans, and honestly, pretty much anybody that would stop and give me the time of day and let me talk to them and hear their story. This is some of what I've gleaned. Some by making mistakes and missing the opportunity, others by going back and thinking about the interaction and realizing, oh, this was gold, or here's how we make that better. So let me dive into that. I highly encourage that you use a recorder of some sort, a digital recorder, an app on your phone, that you will have one chance to get an oral history recording. And so you may run into situations where you have to do pencil and paper, and that is totally fine. But if you can, most of my emphasis here this morning is going to be on using that recorder. So my friend Maureen, and I've talked with Barbara about that. Maureen lives in Hawaii, and she reminded me of the importance of talking story before you even get started with an interview. And while that's a cultural thing in Hawaii, it is also relevant in many other places. Here in the Southwest, where I am, and a large Native American contingent as well, and part of our culture, it is vital that you take the time to hear story. So while you're thinking like a reporter, you're approaching this much softer, much more winsomely and approachable. You can hear that desire to tell story when you begin engaging people in those conversations. So I've learned to look for it wherever I am, and really to give margin and space for hearing the story. So my first main tip for you is you want to make sure that you schedule space around your visits with people to hear their stories. Leave time in your daily schedule to really listen to the people that you're talking with, particularly with family. You know, those opportunities for conversation are going to come up sometimes at inopportune moments, and you need to be ready. And many other times you're going to be able to plan for them. My second tip is, before you set up that recorder, find that common ground to build rapport, that talking story bit. Start soft, begin with easy things, easy questions. Don't just jump in like a hard-hitting investigative reporter to dig down to the meat. You might get to that later. That is important, but don't begin there. Don't stick a microphone in front of someone's face if you can avoid it. You're not that reporter. Also, set up in a quiet room where there's fewer distractions. You can avoid, for the most part, the phone going off or the refrigerator turning on. If you've been able to set this interview up and have a caller microphone, or someone is prepared to dedicate this time to this interview, test that before you get going. Make sure your batteries are good. I always have old-fashioned pencil and paper because technology sometimes falls down on the job. And that way you can be sure to capture that story. So ease your nervousness, the nervousness of the person that you're talking to a little bit. Let's see. Okay, so pencil and paper. All right, one of the things you're going to be noting as you are interviewing your subject is you're going to write down what's going on in the background. You're going to write down the behaviors. So I really like to try to interview people in their homes when I can. They're more at ease there, and they're surrounded by things that they love. They're those objects, as we've often talked about, that are prompts for stories. You can pull those in as well, and I won't repeat that. It's been shared quite extensively, and I have talked about it before as well, about how to use those objects as prompts. But bring them in, go prepared with some if you can, find them in the room and bring them over if you can to help jog those memories. But you're also going to be paying attention to how someone is sitting in a chair. Maybe they might gaze out a window as they're thinking about something. Make some notes about the atmosphere that is in the room where you're doing the interviewing. And I always make notes about whether they're laughing about something, or, you know, that box of Kleenex, which make sure you bring one with you. There will be times when you need that. So that will add depth to the story that you're then going to create later. And probably one of the most important tips is to intentionally ask for the story. So you've set up, I talked about setting time aside to listen for those stories and look for opportunity. Ask for it. Probably the most common not complaint, but excuse that I get from folks is that they think they're boring. They don't think they have anything to share. And, you know, why would someone want to hear my stories? And it is, if you can help them get past that and say, just give me 5 minutes, let's just talk a little bit, and enter into that and show them the types of things that you would like to hear, they're going to start opening up. So ask for it. I think Barbara mentioned yesterday, assure those storytellers what you're going to do with their stories. Reassure them that you are respectful of their words, that this is something that belongs to them, and they get the ultimate say over that. For example, often when I'm doing a hour's worth of oral history interviews, I always tell folks, don't worry about censoring yourself when we do this. You need to be free to talk. Here's the Kleenex. I'm assuring you, you have total control over both these tapes that we're doing and anything that you choose to put in your final product, whether it's a recording or a book. And so don't worry about rabbit trails. We're going to go all over the place. We'll arrange those later for if you're doing a book. And anything that you have talked about and are unsure that you really want that out for public consumption, we'll take care of that. So that is key, I think, to getting the story and encouraging them to share. Let's see, where am I at? Don't be afraid of silences. So as you're listening for the story and you've maybe tossed a prompt or a question out there that you want someone to answer, you can tell they're thinking. Give them a little bit to do that. You know, as Barbara and I were laughing before we got started, we sometimes get so excited about this work that we jump in and we want to add to it or prompt, but give space. This is their story. Let them think about it. Sometimes it happens that they lose track and don't remember what it was that you asked. So you can go back and give a little soft reminder of that. But you can say, can you tell me more about this? And one key right here in this, don't be afraid of silences, is when you want them to tell you more, ask for sensory details. Many times, folks are natural storytellers, and they will give you even more sensory detail than you can use in your final product. But oftentimes it will be just the facts, ma'am. And they will just, particularly depending on the type of career this person has. For example, I'm working with a gentleman right now who is he's been a builder for 50 years in the community and in the construction business. And he wants to get to the point, but he's also a fabulous storyteller. So he is going back and editing what we want to put. He's creating a book, and he is adding in some of those details that at first did not occur to him. He was just trying to get the facts out there because this is part of his workflow. And so he's having a great time adding in those details. But he also, we did this thing where I feel like a spy. We were trading recorders. So I would interview him, but then he said, sometimes I'm sitting around in the evening and I fed the goats and I think of something. So he's telling stories into his recorders, which often have a lot more detail, and he's trading those with me. So it's sort of like this pass off of this illegal substance as we trade this, and it's a lot of fun. We get a kick out of it. But when you are doing those interviews, as I did with him, invite the sensory details. So I think I'm down to about, I lost track of where I was. If I do 6 or 7 instead of 8, forgive me. But what I want to encourage you to do is also have fun. Encourage your storyteller. This is particularly important, I think, when you're working with family members. Listen quietly, but stay engaged. And it's hard, but even though you're taking notes, make eye contact so that they know that you're listening to them. And you want to help them see the power of ordinary conversations. And let me find a note that I wanted to read to you about that. I think if you're helping them to understand that process of speaking their story is going to be transforming to both themselves and others that will hear this, that they begin to see that as a gift that they can give to people and themselves as well. Let me find this note. So here's an example just from a work experience. I interviewed a colleague for a business newsletter. She was professional, friendly, extremely competent. She's an engineer. And before that day, we had visited really on a surface level. But we went off in a side room and just started with some chit chat. I set the recorder on the table and I said, we're just going to forget about that now. Let's just leave it there and let's just talk about life a little bit, and you'll have the final say in anything before we go permanent with this. And it was transformative listening to her talk. She talked about choosing joy in difficult circumstances and loving her children and her work and friendships, some of the amazing adventures and fun and zest for life. She's 60 plus years old, and I found out that she was an award-winning weightlifter. And she did this on the side, and she was a scuba diver, and just her delight in choosing to live a full and interesting life was contagious. And so we were able to share that. There have been other times where I would set up to do an interview with someone and I knew they had great stories and would set the scene, let's go to your favorite coffee shop. Sometimes that background noise, even though it's not great for oral recordings, is the place where your person feels comfortable and perhaps where they won't be interrupted by family members, that type of thing. So I show up at this coffee shop, and this fellow is, he has a Purple Heart. He's a veteran. He works in the farming and ranching community now, and he's just an amazing person. And I took out pencil and paper and said, I just want to make some notes so I'm accurate, this kind of thing. And he said, I don't want to share my story. I said, Mike, we set up the interview so you could share your story about farming and ranching, and I want to respect what you'd like to do. And he said, he was coming from a place of being humble. He said, I do not want to be bragging. He said, I've been successful. Yeah, I have these military honors. I don't want me to be the showcase. And I said, okay, I respect that. And you know what? I put my stuff away and I hopped in his pickup truck, and we spent the next 2 hours driving around his acres of pecan orchards and him telling the best stories and stopping and introducing me to other generational farmers. And it became this fantastic experience, and ended up, I could share none of that. So there's a cautionary tale. I was not able to share a thing. What I did do was listen to him well and give him the gift, human to human, of hearing his story, of honoring that. And at the end, I said, Mike, I know you don't want to share this for an article for the paper or even the company newsletter. That is okay. Would you share some of this with your family and go tell them some of the stories that you shared with me? I said, this was just a fantastic day. So sometimes it ends up that way. And I'm sure you all, like me, let me glance at my time here. I'm still doing okay. Like me, you have probably run into family members that can be resistant about sharing their story for whatever reason. I have had the whole gamut as well. I've had a family member who was the memory keeper of the whole family and told wonderful stories and had all the facts and the names and all the connections straight, going back generations in North Carolina. When she passed away, most of that was gone. And that was always sad. We try to reconstruct that as well as we can. And I have other occasions where people just got spooked about maybe sharing too much. This happened with my own father. I think I was telling Barbara about this. A couple of years before he passed away, I really wanted to capture some more stories we talked all the time, but I wanted to record them because I wanted to give this as a gift for my brother and have my dad's voice sharing these stories. And I said, Dad, would you be willing to talk story to me? I was up visiting them in Colorado, and he said, oh, I don't know about that. Not sure. And my parents are divorced, so he sometimes gets sort of edgy about that family complication. And that wasn't the direction I was going to go, but he wasn't hearing that. And so I just left it with him. I said, here's what I want to do and why. Why don't you think about it? And then I dropped it, just backed off from that, let him sit with it. I think he probably lost some sleep that night and fretting about that. But what he did was the next morning, bright and early, we got a cup of coffee, patted out there. This was bunny slipper time. And he said, I want to tell some of those stories. I said, great. You get to drive that conversation. You want to talk about childhood stories? My family, his grandparents had homesteaded in Eastern Oregon. I mean, it was just some neat, in a chicken coop to start. Those were just some neat stories. And for 2 hours, he sat and told me stories. I said, can I record it, Dad, just because I don't want to mistake notes, and I want your voice telling these because I want to give this to my brother. And he said, sure, that's okay. And so at that point where he'd had a chance to think about it, he no longer saw me with this doofy reporter hat, which I avoid at all costs. But, people get their preconceived notions. He didn't see that anymore. He saw me in my bunny slippers, curled up on the couch. Yeah, the recorder was there, but I was just engaged with him and got the stories. They're priceless to us. And they might not have happened otherwise. So that's another tip for how to approach reluctant family members. Other situations where you are chit-chatting, I think I'm about out of time, but where you're chit-chatting, or maybe you're going to interview a family member, a big tip and suggestion would be, if you're trying to interview one family member at a time, try to do that without anybody else in the room. Especially, we love our spouses, we love significant family members, but we finish each other's sentences and we interrupt and we correct and say, you're not telling it right. So to avoid some of that, get your interview subject on their own. Try to get the dog in the backyard so they don't bark at the UPS guy, all of those things, so you can really focus. And in those situations, what I often do, because I've done many projects where I'm doing couples, is I'll interview them separately, and then I'll get them together, and we'll do a joint interview as well, and just let them go at it, because that interaction is fun as well and is part of the family memories. One really fun group situation that I learned a lot from was a family with 6 kids, and the daughters managed to pull together a time where, so it was 5 girls and 1 boy. Interviewed the boy by phone. He was in Houston. Boy, they're grown adults now, but those 5 girls got around the dining room table of the gal who lives in town with me, and they had a gab fest, and it was an absolute riot. The humor, the little funny, snarky things that siblings do to each other, all of that came out. So I'm taking furious notes, to sort of get all of this, and I'm recording them. Even though at the beginning I said, when you talk, I need you to say who you are, because I'm going to listen to this recording later and transcribe it. We started off okay, and then that sort of devolved. But by that time, I primarily had a sense of whose voice I was hearing as they popped in and said something. And that hour recording probably took me twice as long as any other to try to sort through, but I wouldn't have missed it for anything. And of course, they got that copy of that recording after. And it was a rare thing for 5 of them to get together in the same room and talk about their mother had immigrated from Mexico, and talk about the old cures and all the magical things you can do with spider webs. and just the growing up really poor but resourceful. All these kids had gone to college. The parents still only spoke a little bit of English, though a daughter was translating for me. My Spanish is un poquito. And it was just a really positive interview with family done in a slightly different way. So let me just look at my notes here real quick to make sure I have, one more thing that I want to tell you, another tip real quick before we kick off. Watch for those opportune moments to gather stories. Might not be over a dedicated interview time, might be in the car. That's a big one. Make sure you've got a recording app on your phone. I just finished a project where some of the interviews I received were done with a daughter and her dad in the car, and we got all those worked into his project. Might be doing the dishes, and you all know that after dinner pie at holidays, we're doing a lot of story exchanging them too. So watch out for those opportunities. Pay attention to the emotion in the people that you're interviewing, and that will tell you where those hooks are and the things that are really meaningful for them. And I have so much more I could share, but I think I need to stop and we'll just open it up.
Wow, that was fabulous. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Karen. And spot on to our little 30-minute window thing. I've never seen anything like this. I am going to turn off the recorder, which is a little special bait to all of you watching the recordings as to why it's so much fun to be here during the recordings. But here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let's take on the conversation.